30 Minutes with Ron.
Hi, and welcome to 30 Minutes with Ron. I'm Larry Walters.
And I'm Nicholas Walters.
And we'll be your host today. For this special program of 30 Minutes with Ron, we have as our guest Ron Gagliardi himself, normally the host of the show, but today our special guest. I think you're going to enjoy hearing from Ron and all the ways that he's contributed to Cheshire and the surrounding community. And in many ways, he's been an outstanding citizen and a model for all of us as we seek to do more community involvement. So Ron, let me welcome you to your own show.
Thank you.
And also, as we've talked leading up to the show, you've told us about many things that you've done at the town. And it seems like at one point you mentioned you almost had a dozen jobs. Things like Justice of the Peace and town councilman. There was director of the Lock 12 Museum and even the town crier.
Yep.
So we're looking forward to hearing more about that today.
Well, it's certainly an interesting resume.
It sure is.
Now, Ron, we know you have done so many things, and it's hard to find a place to begin, but let's start with some of the things that you thought were the most significant. We understand that you have a real interest in history. One thing that stands out is your work in creating the Cheshire's Patriot Trail. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. There's a gentleman in town named John White, and a while back his goal was to make Cheshire stand out on the map as a place that was completely full of patriots and patriotism. And I had this idea that it might be nice to have a Patriot Trail. So I went to John and I suggested, hey, let's do this. And he thought it was a good idea. So what he did was he researched all the sites that he thought were patriotic or of interest to patriots, like some of the graveyards where veterans are buried, some of the monuments. And so he researched and did some writing. He asked me to take photos of them, and then we put it together, and we had a little brochure, only 1 or 2 copies. And we went to some of the area newspapers to let them know that it existed. We also submitted it to Hillary Clinton's 1999 millennial, I guess it was not a contest, but you could be named a millennial project, and they approved it, and we got a little plaque. And it was published in the Cheshire Herald. It was the whole front page was a picture from an 1880 map of Cheshire with some of the sites on it. Well, I guess all of them, really, with a number of what the site was. And then throughout the newspaper, there were photos that I had taken and the captions John had written about it. And even at the time when we introduced it to the town council, there was a group in town who offered to pay to have the brochure printed up, and we never took them up on it. And I don't even remember right now what the name of the group was. So if anybody out there remembers that they wanted to print this up or wants to, give me a call.
So how did it get started?
Just came up with that idea. I knew that John wanted to put Cheshire on the map as a place that was full of patriotism, and I thought that would be a good way to help out.
How could someone get started learning about the Patriot Trail?
That would be tough, because right now there's no brochure. You'd have to find the copy of the Cheshire Herald, which was published in, I think, January of 2000. And you'd have to get it from their files. But if we're lucky, we'll get it out there as a publication.
Okay, good.
Ron, you also mentioned the town council a few moments ago, and we understand that you served on the town council. What does the town council do, and why did you want to serve on it?
Well, the town council is the group that leads the town. We have a council manager form of government, and the manager is the person who deals with the day-to-day running of Cheshire, but the council kind of sets the pace and approves things and disapproves things and sets the mill rate. They're quite an important group, especially for a town that has a multi-million-dollar budget. I had always thought that would be a good thing to serve on, but I had this little baggage that come along with. I'm somehow known as someone who's kind of wacky. Don't tell anybody. And so it's hard for a person like that to be nominated to run for a responsible position of councilman. But it also turns out that I had been writing this poem in the Cheshire Herald for 7 years that was every week in the Cheshire Herald. It was a limerick-style poem. And at the end of it, you have to sign your name. So every week, Ron Gagliardi, 5 Gateway Court, that was my address at the time, Cheshire, appeared in this letters to the editor. So as a result, I had massive name recognition in Cheshire. And according to the political pundits, it helps to have name recognition when you get into the voting booth. So someone came to me and said, Ron, we know you have a little baggage, but let's try this. So they asked me to run for council, and I did. Unfortunately, I ran the way I like to run for council. I don't like to get calls from people running for office, and I don't like them showing up on my doorstep once every 2 years when they need some kind of information. And so I said, I'm not going to do that. So I didn't make calls, I didn't go door to door, and I didn't win. However, they kept on asking me to run. So I think the second time I ran at large. I think the first time was in a district. When you run at large, the whole town gets to vote for you. And I got the most at-large votes of any Democrat. And it turns out, however, that in our counts, I lost. Excuse me, microphone. All the Republicans got more votes than I did. But in our town, we have a minority provision, and you have to have 2 of the minority. So in this particular election, one Democrat won on her own. She was a district candidate, so they had to go to the at-large candidates. And since I had the most votes, I got to serve, even though I hadn't won. And one poor Republican who had the least at-large votes, he didn't get to serve. I displaced him. And so for 2 years, I was on the council. And basically, nobody listened to me. I can't understand why. I even had some pretty good ideas. And I think you were asking about one of them earlier. There's a place in Cheshire called the Loch 12 Park, which is wonderful now. It's a linear park, and it goes along the Farmington Canal Trail. And we have terrible traffic problems in Cheshire. Had them then, which was the early 80s, and still have them now. So a friend of mine on the council who was listening to me on occasion, a Republican fellow, we had this idea to turn the canal, the whole line, into a one-way street. And in the morning, it would be one way going south, and in the evening, it'd be one way going north. And this would get a lot of traffic off of Route 10. And I don't see how anyone could disagree with that, but they did. They said, we're not going to deal with that. And I'm very glad that they didn't, because we would not have the linear trail, and it could not be part of this greenway that's going to go from Florida to Canada. Would have been quite a bit of missing stuff there. So I'm glad that they didn't listen to me.
Interesting. Well, what were some of the other things that you found interesting on the council when you served?
Well, we had this budget process, and I never could really understand the budget process. The way it turns out, the party in power gets to say, I think the people can afford this much of an increase in the mill rate. And they did this without even saying what the town really needed. So my feeling was, you decide what the people need and what the town has to have, and then you set the mill rate. But the folks who I was on the budget committee with, they said, no. Well, they didn't say this, but that's how they do it. They just say, we think they can handle a 2.3 mil increase without taking it to referendum. So they made the budget fit that. And so I didn't like that. So when it came time to vote on it, I abstained. So everybody was upset with me.
Do you feel that you had any significant contributions that you looked to?
Not at all.
So it was a great experience.
It was a great experience. I wish I could. There was one time that one of the folks on the opposing party on the council went off on me so badly during a council meeting that the mayor had to tell him, stop it. So that was an interesting contribution.
Was it a chance to use your humor?
No. I wish it could have been humorous, but it was really not.
Good. Okay.
Now, we know you're the director of the Loch 12 Museum. Tell us about that.
All right. The Loch 12 Museum is a group, actually 2 buildings that were put into one. It sits next to the lockkeeper's house in the Loch 12 area on the Farmington Canal. And it turns out that the buildings were not there during the time that the canal was in operation, which is 1828 to 1848. But somewhere in 1979, 1980, the town decided that since they owned the property and they wanted to do something with it, they thought, let's put in a museum. So there was a property up Route 42, the McMaster's property, that had these buildings that they didn't need anymore. And I have not found out yet if the town bought them or if they were donated. But what happened was they took a truck or 2, they went up to these buildings, they took them apart, painted whatever it was, the side brace or whatever, number 3, and put them on the truck and brought them down to the site and put them together again. But this time they decided not to have 2 separate buildings. One of them was a carpentry shop and one was a blacksmith forge. So they put them together and they called it the Raymond Beard Loch 12 Museum. Hardly anyone knows that Raymond Beard is one of the guys who put this whole thing together. And so they decided to honor him, and they called it the Raymond Beard. But it's R-A-I-M-O-N, no D. He's deceased now, but he was quite the guy. Anyway, so they had the opening in 1980, and I was actually there. I was a JC at the time, and they said, let's ask the JCs to add some color. And they said, wear these costumes. So they had white shirts for us and tri-cornered hats. And that's colonial. And this was 1828 to 1848. So we were what's called an anachronism, a misplacement in time. But it was fun to be there. Some years later, after a couple of families and a couple individuals decided they did not want to be the voluntary director of it, the Park and Rec chair, Bob Ceccolini, or the Park and Rec director, excuse me, said, who could we get who doesn't mind not being paid for things? Who likes to volunteer? And he said, oh, I know who. That's that Gagliardi fella. So they asked me to be the director. So I've been the director for almost 10 years, and I open it on Sundays, the first or second Sunday of every month, from 12 to 2. I also open it for classes and other groups who want to tour on days that are not that Sunday, and they just call me up, and I open it up whenever I can for them.
I see. So why is it significant?
Well, let's see. The canal itself is significant because it was a period of time when they needed some kind of transportation that wasn't going to be bogged down in the muddy roads at the time. Even Route 10 was not paved. I think they called it the College Highway then. So you'd have these muddy ruts, and the wagon wheels would get stuck, and it was just horrible. So it was easier for barges to go up and down the canal. So that was one reason that it was significant.
So how could someone get started learning about the Lock 12 Museum?
Well, they could come there. They could Google it, and there's information about it there. There's a couple of books about it. The New Haven Museum has a couple out. And before I forget, I wanted to say something that I thought was kind of interesting at the time. There's a very wonderful gentleman named Joseph King, and he helped me to run it for a couple of years. And I'm an inveterate punster. And I hate to admit this, but it took me 2 years to realize that this man's name is Joking. Joseph King is Joking. And my name is Gag. So Joking and Gag ran a museum.
That sounds like a comedy show.
It sounds like a comedy show, but we were serious, and we're still very serious.
Well, now for some more fun activities. We understand that you're also a Justice of the Peace.
Yes.
Now, everyone knows that a Justice of the Peace marries people, but what else do they do?
I have absolutely no idea. I've married some folks, but I haven't done anything else as a Justice of the Peace. I should read the manual.
Well, why did you want to be a Justice of the Peace?
Well, I like titles. And there was this title that I could get, and I didn't have to pay anything for it. So I just put my name in, and they said, okay, you can be a Justice of the Peace. The way it works in Cheshire, the Republican Party gets to put up, I think, 20 people's names on this list, and the Democrats get to do this. And so these names are put on a list at the town hall, and if somebody's looking for someone to marry them, they say, okay, your turn is number 7 on the list, and when the 7th person calls, we'll recommend you. So I knew that that would be something I could do, and you can actually earn money. I think it depends on how much you put into it, and if you want to wear robes and stuff. I think I used to charge $100, and I used to videotape people too while I was doing this. So I called it a vowdiographer because I videotaped their vows. I don't really do it much anymore, so I'm not promoting myself.
Well, what did you enjoy most about that when you did it?
Actually, the fun of seeing two people get hitched in a way that I did. I mean, it happened to me, and I enjoyed it. And I like to tell people, my wife and I have been enjoying blissful marriage for 35 years. Unfortunately, we've been married for 45 years, but 35 of those years were blissful. So helping two people to embark on this blissful journey was the fun of it.
Oh, that sounds great.
Now for a really interesting role. We understand you're a town crier.
Yes.
What is exactly a town crier, and what do they do? Like, is it someone that comes to the town and cries on it?
Well, I have cried on occasion, but we won't go into that. No, it turns out that town criers have been around, I think, since the 1500s, especially in Europe. And what happened was people needed a way to get information about what was happening. So groups would hire someone to either beat a drum or ring a bell and go around the center of town usually to tell people, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye, such and such is happening, there's a meeting tomorrow night, and they would find out about it that way. So basically that they were the anchor person of the period. Now, this was a couple years ago, I think maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago. I decided, I think I need another title. And there weren't any town criers in town. I don't even know if there's any still in the state of Connecticut. So I went to the town council in Cheshire, and I said, how about this? Wouldn't you like to name me the official town crier? And I could lead parades, and I could open up festivals, and it would be kind of a novel, almost like a colonial thing, like time travel. So they said, well, we can do that, but we don't want to name you the official town crier. And I said, well, why not? Because they said, well, what if a cake maker comes to us and wants to be the official cake maker of Cheshire? That might help them to get more business. We don't want to do that. We can't promote businesses as a town council. So we'll name you the honorary town crier, which I don't see the difference. I mean, you could have an honorary cake maker too.
Right.
For me, it's a bit of a difference because unless you're an official town crier, you cannot participate in the town crier competitions that are happening around the country and around the world. So because of that, I just get to be a town crier around here. And I did get to lead a couple of parades in Cheshire, and my most recent accomplishment was I was hired to lead the 375th parade, anniversary parade of the town of Clinton, right down Route 1. And they said, you're going to lead the parade. And I thought, yeah, there's going to be a honor guard and all that. I was actually the first thing in the parade. Shocked the heck out of me.
Sounds like fun, isn't it?
It is fun. You get to make a fool of yourself and ring a bell and say, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye, or oh yay, oh yay, oh yay, which, by the way, is spelled O-Y-E-Z. And I think it's French for what's up.
So what did you enjoy most about it? Was it being first in the 375th parade, or what
That's
was
part
it?
of it. And as I like to say this, and I say it often, unabashedly, I like attention. My parents were very nice to me. They showered me with attention, and I still continue to like it. And there's not too many ways you can be avoided by being at the front of a parade. So there was quite a group of attention that was coming my way.
Oh, great.
You know, Ron, we talked earlier about all the jobs that you had in Cheshire, and I think we mentioned that you had close to a dozen jobs. What were some of the other things that you did in town that you really enjoyed and felt you had a contribution?
One of them was being the acting director of adult education. It turns out that the director had left for some reason, and they were having trouble finding someone, and I found out about this, and I went to the folks in charge, and I said, you know, I've led a couple of things, I've been a director here and there. Why don't you give me a shot? I mean, you don't have anything to lose, and if I don't do well, I'm an acting director anyway. You can, no tenure, you can get rid of me easily. And they said, okay. They were nice enough to say, we'll give it a go. So I became the acting director of adult ed. And the nice thing about that is you get to help people get their high school equivalency diploma, and you get to help other people become American citizens. So we had a staff, and I got to oversee this and go to state meetings and help things in town. And it turns out that I guess I was doing a pretty good job. The staff liked me, and the people were getting their degrees and becoming citizens. And then one day, my boss came to me and said, you know what, Ron? We decided that we would like someone in that position who has a degree in administration. And he said, even though it's not required, the state doesn't require it, we decided we'd put someone in there with that degree, and I don't have that degree. And the staff said, wait, we like Ron, he's doing a great job. No, we want someone with an administrative degree. So I was no longer the acting director of adult ed, but that was a position that I really enjoyed.
Huh. Any other positions that come to mind that you particularly felt comfortable with and enjoyed?
Yes, I had started something called the Pride in Cheshire campaign. There was a time that, I don't know, people were not happy about Cheshire for some reason, and I said, let's get some pride into this. And so we came up with a couple of programs, and I made some suggestions here and there, and they liked it enough so that they decided to have an actual committee. So the Beautification Committee was founded based on my idea to help Cheshire have a nice opinion of itself. And I was named to the group. And fortunately for me, there was I'm a Democrat, and there was a Republican on the committee who was nice enough to nominate me to be the chair. So I got to be the first chair of the Beautification Committee. And we did a whole bunch of stuff for the time that I was chair. And when I left, another person got to be chair, and they've done even more stuff. So we're happy now.
Sounds like a lot of these roles
Yeah.
were very fulfilling.
Certainly were for me.
Would you encourage other people, perhaps in our listening audience, to get involved in town activities?
Well, my feeling is if you live in a place, especially a nice place like Cheshire, and you're reaping the benefits of living here, you should be giving back something. I used to be a JC, like I mentioned earlier, and I think we have a creed in the JCs. One of the lines is, service to humanity is the best work of life. And I took that seriously. We used to repeat it before every meeting, and I took that very seriously. And I don't do a lot of things seriously, but I believe that you got to give back to your community. So I decided a long time ago that whatever I could do, whether it was being a president of the Homeowners Association or being on the council or being on committees, that I would do that. And my wife was nice enough to let me out of the house. Matter of fact, she likes me out of the house as much as possible. And so I was able to go out and do these things partially because of her nicety.
Now, if someone wanted to get more involved in the town, get more involved in some of these activities, how would they go about doing it?
Well, I guess the best way would be to pick something that you like, that you have a passion about. For example, there's a group in town that helps the feral cat population. And what they do is they capture them and spay and neuter them so that they don't add to the population. So that's something that a lot of people don't think about. But these folks were interested in cats and they were interested in helping the town, so they started this group. So I would recommend find something they're interested in, see if there's a group involved that's doing it, or if there isn't, start one. And if it's something that needs approval from the town council, go see them. You know, they have a part of the meeting that's the public input. You can check things out with them at that or before time, and then you can get to be really involved in helping the town.
Any particular roles in town that need help right now that you're aware of that we could call attention to?
I just heard of one, as a matter of fact. I'm on a group called the School Business Partnership Council. And there seems to be a clamor for kids to learn foreign language at a young age. They do have foreign language at Dodd, the middle school, and they do have another department, a major department at the high school. They even put in a language lab recently. But they just decided that they'd like to investigate what it would be like to have it at a lower level, when it would be introduced, and how much would be given. So at the meeting, Scott Dietrich, the assistant superintendent, asked for people to volunteer. And after the meeting, I went to him and I said, Scott, I actually was going to be a language teacher, and I had taken French, Italian, Latin, and Spanish. Don't remember much of any of them, molto bene, but I would like to volunteer because I have a love of language, and I think that it's a great thing to have it at a younger level. So that's something that people can get involved in.
Great. Well, thanks for mentioning that.
Sure.
Now, are there any other jobs or activities that you haven't done yet that you are planning on doing?
I'd love to run for state representative, but I'm sure that is not going to happen. So I guess besides that, I guess that's about it. I'm not going to be a state rep, but it would have been nice to be able to do that.
Well, what would you like to accomplish in that role if you wanted to?
Well, when you get to be a state representative, you get to help a lot of things. One of the things you get to assist in is education in the state of Connecticut. And there's this thing called Common Core, and there's a big hubbub about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But I've had this idea for many years that there should be 3 things that kids should have in their educational backpack. And one of them is a super memory, and one of them is speed reading, and one of them is being creative. And there are ways to teach all of those things. And I keep on trying to get that into the different curricula, but some people just don't seem to think that it's a good idea. And so one of my ideas is to try to get at those 3 things into curricula. So if I were on a state level rep, if I were a state rep, that would be something I would try to get through the education committee.
I see, good.
Any other things that you would like to contribute as a state representative?
Let's see. I think there should be a way to tax people that's not uncomfortable. There's been some talk about putting tolls back in on highways, and they were taken away many years ago because there had been a major accident with all kinds of deaths, and they decided, you know, we can't do this. But they seem to be working in a lot of different places. And at the time, this was actually when President Nixon was president, I had this idea of advertising on toll booths because you have a captive audience. You're sitting there and you're looking in this direction to pay, and you've got to see whatever ad is there. So I actually wrote to President Nixon and tried to get through to somebody who would think that's a good idea, but no, it didn't happen. So if I were a state rep or a state senator, if we were going to put tolls back in, I would try to get those, because there are some tolls around that do have advertising now, and they're making money, and why not take advantage of that?
Right.
So I guess there were no easy passes back then.
That's true. Easy Pass had not been invented, but there's still a lot of people who don't use Easy Pass, so those folks would actually be seeing the ads. Yeah.
Great. Ron, you know, in many ways, you've been a model citizen with responsible positions like serving on the town council, justice of the peace, and also some fun things like the town crier we talked about. If there were people listening to our program today and they were interested in getting involved, what would you suggest that they would do? Where would they start, and how would they go about actually taking a greater hand in their community?
Well, I had mentioned starting your own organization,
Right.
but it's also a good idea to see what's out there and see what they're doing. And so there's a thing called the Community Guide. It's put out by the Cheshire Chamber of Commerce, and they're available all over town for free. And in there's a listing of all the groups that you could possibly have in Cheshire, that are in Cheshire, that you could be possibly interested in. And so you could look through those and see if any of those would fit your requirements for something you'd like to try. So either find an existing one that you like or start one on your own. Those are the two best ways to go about it.
Sounds like great advice.
Do you have any concluding thoughts that you would like to share with us today?
I think I'd like to thank my parents because they helped me to become who I am, encouraged me, and gave me lots of attention and got me on the path for getting lots of titles. And I'd like to thank I'd like to thank my wife, who's been very nice to me, and also my children who had to put up with me and the embarrassment that their father caused them for most of their lives. And I'd like to thank you folks and the crew and Cox Communications for allowing all this to happen.
Well, that's wonderful. Certainly we all do owe a lot to our parents and family and friends. And so, Ron, and especially to you, we want to thank you for the opportunity to be our guest today and joining us and sharing your thoughts and
pleasure.
wonderful experience about being in the town.
And yes, and we do appreciate you coming today to speak with us and discuss how you've become an outstanding citizen of the Cheshire community.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks again, Ron. We appreciate it. We hope you all enjoyed our show this evening and hearing from Ron, our special guest. Ron is normally the host of this show, but today, being our guest, it was a wonderful opportunity to hear from him and his experience. So from all of us at 30 Minutes with Ron, we appreciate you tuning in. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.